Hi, this is Chuck.
And this is Karen.
And this is our show,
What If It Really Works?
A Practical Guide to Spirituality. And we're sitting in the Bonnie Doon, California, on the porch of Bruce and Margaret Lipton. And we are about to introduce you to one of the most fascinating conversations you're ever going to hear. These two people are going to talk to you about how they have applied consciousness to both the discipline of biology and physics. And in doing that, they have expanded the possibility of both. And also, they have made it possible for those two disciplines to speak to each other because they're dealing with the same dynamics and the same observations and the same way things work. So without further ado, we're going to introduce you to Bruce and Tom, and they are going to go. That sounds like a radio show, doesn't it? Bruce and Tom.
Don't let him start. He'll never stop.
That's okay. I don't mind listening, you know.
Yeah, that's the voice of experience in there.
Go.
Okay. And the question is, what is it that we do in relation to consciousness and physics?
Yes.
That sort of thing. Okay. Well, as it turns out, consciousness is kind of the very deepest root of physics. Consciousness is where it all starts. So consciousness is the super system, if you will. Consciousness is the big picture. So we start with consciousness, and that's the big picture. From there on, if we have just two assumptions, and one that consciousness, consciousness exists, and that evolution exists, and by evolution I mean a very generic kind of evolution, and that is that large complex systems that are self-changing will change for their own, for their own benefit. That's kind of the idea of the evolution. So if you just have those two assumptions, all the rest you can derive. From there, you can derive not only our local consciousness, our awareness here, you can derive this physical reality. You not only can derive the nature and basic facts and physics of the physical reality, but you can derive the why of the physical reality. Why is it here? Why are we here? What's the point? You can then go on to develop the physics from those two assumptions. Quantum mechanics is based on an assumption that matter at the micro level is just probability distributions. And it turns out that matter at the macro level is just probability distributions as well. And they work the same way in the macro world as it works in the micro world. You can derive relativity. Relativity is based on one central fact, and that is that the speed of light is a constant. Doesn't matter how the light is moving, the light itself, it doesn't matter the velocity of the source. The light from that source always travels at the same speed. And it's a constant called c. And from that fact, special relativity falls out as just a little bit of algebra. And then general relativity falls out of special relativity. So the key piece of knowledge there is that c is a constant. And of course that's a big mystery, just like why should particles be probability distributions, real big mystery. Well, if you understand this reality as virtual and as consciousness is the computer generating the virtual reality, then you can derive these things. The reason that c is a constant is in this virtual reality. Think of it as a simulation. Simulations are driven by the time loop. So you have a delta t. Every delta t, the simulation updates itself. In this reality, that's a very small number. It's like 10 to the minus 43 seconds, 44 seconds. So it's a very, very fast turnaround. That's I don't know how we say that. That's like 30-some orders of magnitude smaller than what we can measure yet. So it's very small. So in any case, every delta t, you can move a piece of virtual information, if you will, from this spot to that spot. And the next delta t, you can move it to the next adjacent spot. And that's as fast as it can be moved. Well, how fast is that? That's c, that's the speed of light. So the speed of light's a constant because this is a virtual reality and how the virtual reality works. So now we're deriving physics, you see, from these understandings. The rest of it is just working out the math once you understand these basic ideas. Now what physics has done is they've started with working out the math, but don't have a clue as to why it should be that way. Why should C be a constant? Why should particles be probability distributions? It's like, I don't know, it is, big mystery. Nobody will ever understand it, but we know if we make that assumption, we can compute right answers that experiment then verifies. Well, if you start, that's because they're starting in a subset. If you start with a subset of the knowledge, all you can do is calculate from there on. The why, you have to understand the superset, you see, that feeds the subset. So in the superset is consciousness. Consciousness is a digital information field. Then this is a simulation. This is a virtual reality. So you see, if we start with consciousness and understand that consciousness is a natural system, evolving, still evolving, it's still changing. We're a part of that evolution. Then all the science, all the physics, and the chemistry and the biology then falls out as logical deductions, if you will, from those few basic things. And it also, tying this conscious to physics, it also explains a lot of other mysteries as well. The paranormal then is just normal. It's only paranormal as seen from the subset. Once you have your viewpoint from the superset, there's nothing para about it. It's just normal. It's just the way things work. It's perfectly understandable, repeatable, obvious. It follows logical rules just like anything else. Look at all the work that's been done at Pear Labs, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. They have shown beyond any shadow of a doubt that mind affects matter. Mind changes future reality, and they don't know why. See, they're still working inside the subset. They only know that this happens. If you do these things, you get results, you get evidence, scientific evidence that mind affects matter. You have the placebo effect, mind affects matter. You have all these things that happen, that have been happening for centuries, that are mysteries, and the ones that we can't derive directly from physical process, we call those paranormal. Normal meaning it's an objective physical process. So that's how the physics and the consciousness all kind of fit in together into one program. You can solve these mysteries that we've had. What did the Buddha mean when he said that this physical reality was illusion? Well, if you understand from the larger picture, that's not just poetry, that's a fact. It's just the way it is. Why is it that the answer to any question that is really fundamental is love? Love is the answer. Why is love core to this? Well, if you do the physics from the big picture, you find out that love is evolving. It's the state you get to as you evolve your consciousness. So a highly evolved consciousness is love. And that's our point. We're evolving toward that. So then the metaphysics, the philosophy, the theology, the chemistry, the biology, all kind of fall out of this one overall understanding of the nature of reality as consciousness, and then physical as virtual. And there are multiple realities. This virtual reality is not the only reality frame. There are other reality frames. And that's kind of the overview, if you will, between physics, consciousness, and what we see here.
Well, first of all, Tom, I want to really thank you for being here today, because I'm a biologist and I had to dabble in the physics, and I'm a dabbler in that regard. But then when I hear what you say and what you talk about, then I realize that my dabbling wasn't too far off course. And for me, it's very profound, because as a biologist, the amount of physics I took as a biologist was enough just to get out of physics so I could stay in biology. So basically, I, like most all the biologists, trained in a Newtonian physics, and then left that physics behind as we went into biology. And biology, premised on a Newtonian physics as a mechanical physical reality mechanism, so that a cell is seen as a composition of biochemicals and genes, and it's just looked at as a machine, so to speak. The interesting part about this is what I was actually teaching when I was teaching in medical school. I was teaching this to students and coming down to a very simple understanding about the machine itself, called fundamental reductionist view, that it was all driven by DNA. And so when I was teaching in medical school, we were teaching a concept called genetic determinism. This says that the genetic blueprints really determine your fate and your future and the character of your life. It's an unfortunate teaching for this very important reason, because as far as we know, which I'll challenge at some point, we didn't select the genes that we came with. And since genes control our lives, we also cannot change the genes that we came with, so we are being given an education that says we are victims. We are victims of our heredity, and that the genes control us, and as victims, we let go of our own self-empowerment, our own self-control, and give that up to so-called professionals like the allopathic community. Takes care of my health, I can't do it. So that victimization is what I was teaching. At the same time, I was fortunate enough, and this was 45 years ago, to be working on stem cells, cloning stem cells. And 45 years ago, I can assure you, there were just a handful of us in the entire world that had any idea what the heck stem cells were all about. Stem cells are just multi-potential cells. The moment before you're born, that cell is called an embryonic cell because it's a multi-potential cell. The moment you're born, can't call it an embryonic cell anymore, you're born, so now we change the name, call it a stem cell, same thing. What my research was all about was simple, and yet the results were so profound that it changed the entire course and track of my life. And what the research revealed was this: I took one simple stem cell, put it in a tissue culture dish all by itself. It divides every 10-12 hours. After over a week, I'd say maybe 50,000 cells are in the petri dish. The significance is all these 50,000 cells are genetically identical because they came from the same parent. But the real experiment was then take those cells out of the petri dish, split them up into 3 different petri dishes, and change the environment in each petri dish. The environment to a cell is a culture medium. Cells are like fish. They live in an aquarium, and you have to provide all the elements they need for their life in that fluid of the aquarium, so I make a culture medium. What I did was I took these genetically identical cells, put them in 3 different petri dishes with 3 different media with different chemical composition. In one dish, the cells form muscle. In one dish, the cells form bone. And in the third dish, the cells form fat cells. The most profound question you can ask in this research is, what controls the fate of the cells? The answer is clearly it wasn't the genes, because they were all genetically identical. The only thing that was different was the environment. So while I was teaching medical students genes control life, the cells were teaching me that they were responsive and complementary to an environment. And the significance about that was the belief that I was also teaching that genes control life led to the concept that the nucleus of the cell, which is the repository for almost all of the genes, represented the brain of the cell, because that's where the DNA was, and that's where the DNA controls life, and so the nucleus is the brain of the cell. Well, what my research started to reveal was a very simple fact, that that was not true at all. The nucleus is the gonad of the cell. It's reproduction. It has blueprints. We gave DNA self-actualization. We talk about genes turning on and genes turning off, genes making decisions, when it turns out they're simply blueprints. Genes are blueprints, and as blueprints, they have no self-actualization. A blueprint doesn't turn itself on or turn itself off. It's just a piece of coded information. What you really want to understand is who's the contractor, what's the contractor that reads the genes, selects the genes, etc. My research took me out of the nucleus and brought me to the skin of the cell membrane, which is the first primary structure in the most primitive organisms on the planet. The basic structure they have is a cell membrane. The rest of it is a soupy cytoplasm. The cell membrane for years by biologists was considered nothing more than saran wrap with holes in it to let stuff in and let stuff out. And the significance is in biology, which is a materialistic physical science, they looked at the nature of the cell membrane, saw how that thin that was, that you could only see it in the electron microscope, and it just had a little 3 layers to it. And they said, something that simple can't be that important. And so they dismissed it. My work took me to cell membrane, and on one evening, which was an epiphany that changed my entire life, a download from the universe, in my quest for understanding the nature of the cell membrane, I defined the membrane in a different way than I had done for 10 years. And on that particular night, I looked at the membrane and defined it as, and this is the biochemical terminology, the membrane is a liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels. The gates are called receptors and the channels are called channels. And the significance about that was, at first I thought, wow, what a coincidence. The cell membrane and a computer chip share the exact same names, terminology. But as I started to say, wait a minute, let's check on it, I started to recognize that comparing a cell membrane to a computer chip is not an analogy, it's something we call a homology, meaning its physical structure and its function of the cell membrane are the exact same thing as the physical structure and function of a computer chip. They are both exactly the same. Well, what was so profound for me at the time when I was recognizing this, I recognized, oh, the cell is a programmable chip. The nucleus is a disk with programs, the DNA genes, the hard programs. But the cell membrane was an access device to select the programs and engage the function of the system. So all of a sudden, when I started to look at the cell membrane as the cell, as the brain of the cell, it also then dawned on me, because I was typing on my computer at the same moment, and I realized the cell and the computer are the same thing, but the computer doesn't do anything unless I type on it. And all of a sudden I started to realize a cell has no behavior if it's disconnected from the environment. If you cut what are called the receptors off the surface of the cell, it's comatose. It just sits there, it does nothing. Once the receptors are back onto the surface again, which the cell will replace, the cell then expresses behavior. Simple understanding. The behavior of a cell is a reflection of the environment. And that the environment was what was actually involved with the cell membrane ultimately selecting the genes. And that the cells became a complement to the environment. Yet the most profound piece of it for me as a mechanical cellular biologist so focused on genes and chemistry and all that was, as I was at this very same moment putting this together and starting to get this big aha, the biggest aha that hit me and blew me away was the fact that no two people have the same identity. The identity meaning this: if Tom takes cells out of his body and puts it into mine, my immune system will say not self and reject it. Vice versa, I put my cells into Tom's body, his immune system says not self. And at this point I recognize, well look, cells have identity. And when the understanding of the cell membrane as a control came in, it also hit me that on the cell surfaces of each of our cells, or virtually all of our cells, there are a set of antennas, glycoprotein antennas, that read environmental information. And actually a subset of these recognized by science are called self receptors, receivers of self. Of course, they weren't thinking of it in that terminology, but what I started to recognize, oh my God, the self receptors distinguish one identity from another identity. If I remove the self receptors from a cell, the cell is generic. And I can implant that generic cell into any human because it's now just a human cell with no personal identity to it. If theoretically then I take my cell, take off my self-receptors, my cell becomes generic. But if I take one of Tom's cells and then take his self-receptors off and transplant them onto my cell, if I take that cell, my cell, put it back in my body, reject it as not self. But I take my cell with his surface receptors and put it back into his body, it's accepted as self. The significance was you transfer ownership and identity by a set of antennas. Well, conventional scientists, of course, only look at these antennas as physical molecules and say, oh yes, the physical chemistry of the receptor is responsible for the difference. It's like they missed the point. Receptors, by their definition, are receivers of information. That my cells pick up a different band of information than Tom's cells pick up. That my cells are picking up information from the environment. That's where the receptors are reading. And what hit me at that moment, as being a strictly materialist, physical biology guy, at that very instant I realized, well, wait a minute, if my identity is being picked up from the environment, then if my cell is here or my cell's not here, that doesn't make any difference to the existence of my identity. It's still part of the environment. And all of a sudden I said, oh my God, I'm not even in this thing. I am a signal being picked up and playing through this body. And this blew my mind, because the first thing says, well, immortality is a given. Why? It's the body that comes and goes, not the field information of my identity that's always there. And then I also realized that, oh my gosh, we can't go to Mars, but we really want to know what Mars is all about. So what do? We send up something called the rover. And the rover doesn't look like a human. It's a vehicle with wheels and all kinds of stuff like that, and it moves all over the surface. I said, yeah, but it's the equivalent of a human. Why? It takes the environment of Mars and converts it into what? Vision, smell, taste, sound, all of these things. Why? Because this is how we read the environment. So the rover has receptors to read the environment and pick up this information. But the important part about it is this. The rover is not an isolated mechanism on its own. It's being driven by somebody at NASA. And that's sending a signal up, and it's being received by an antenna. But it's not a one-way street, because the rover, in traveling around Mars, picks up the information from Mars and sends it back through the same antenna to the source. So the guy at NASA has an experience of what being on Mars would be like. Well, it hit me. I said, oh my God, we're Earth rovers. That we receive information, experience information, and then return it to the source. And it was interesting, because the biggest aha of all that came from my own cells. I asked a question to the universe, which then my cells answered. I asked a question when I just realized and owned I exist as a field energy, a spirit, whatever you want to call it, as information in the field. And I also exist as a body. My first question that came up in my head was, then why have both? Why have a spirit and a body? Why not just be the spirit? And my cells came up with this chorus that I just blasted my head. And it was kind of funny, because I think they have Jewish heritage cells, because I asked them a question and they responded in a question. I asked, why have both? And all of a sudden it welled up, and the answer came and said, Bruce, if you're just a spirit, what does chocolate taste like? And all of a sudden I said, oh my God, it's the biology, which is all the receptor devices that translate my environment into sensation, which are then translated by the nervous system into fields and vibrational patterns, which are then sent back to my source. And I realized at that moment, I said, my God, we're here to experience this place, to touch it and smell it, watch sunsets and feel love and eat wonderful food and have all this. And I thought, wow. And then all of a sudden I said, yeah, but it's not just receiving information. When you have a body, you can be creative. We can come to this planet and manifest creativity. And we do this, we step into a virtual reality suit called the body. I step into the suit as a spirit. It communicates with me via just the same way the Mars rover is communicating with NASA, and I get to experience this planet. Beautiful part about it is, of course, I'm going off on all this stuff, and so, well, what the heck is that source that's being read? Well, the first thing is this: it's not physical. It's an energy source. And with more information that quantum physicists have provided us about the biology of proteins, which are the antennas, it reveals that they respond to environmental information through quantum entanglement, through constructive and destructive interference patterns, and all of a sudden it shifted me from my physical, mechanical world to try to understand this. Well, the part is, I'm not the physicist. My dabbling into the physics really came up with a support for all this. But then when I heard Tom say, yes, we come into this life in this virtual reality, I go, okay, we're talking the same thing. And what's so interesting about it is, exactly as Tom talked about, I saw this as a great video game, that I jump into this character. And what's really interesting is, because I mentioned earlier, I said as far as we know we didn't pick our genes. If you can go back upwards and say, what am I going to do when I jump into this character, is that I set up a script to run a show. And I set up a script by picking parents and picking my genes and picking all these things. It's sort of like when the video game started to get more complex. Not only were you a character, before you play the game, you say, well, it was like one of the military ones is usually say, well, before you jump in the game, you can have a choice of 4 rockets, 6 hand grenades, 3 of these things and those things. So you pick these things before you jump into the game. And once you jump into the game with those, then you have to play the game with what you just selected. So what I saw was, oh my God, we come in with a vision to learn something, to create something, to manifest something. And in that process, then we selected the genes, we selected our family, we selected all the aspects of this because you jump into the game. But then the problem is, once we jump into the game, we forget that we're the player of the game. We become the piece in the game. And then if you stay inside the piece, you lose the contact that you're far greater than the piece itself. And so the issue is being the piece, recognizing that we jumped in and we get programmed, and then we play out the program, leads to a very interesting and humorous insight. The movie The Matrix is not science fiction, it's a documentary. And it says that it's time for us to wake up. That we have bought other people's truths and other people's beliefs and manifested a world rather than coming with our own beliefs. Mm-hmm. And that when we give up our power to buy other people's knowledge, then we bought their reality and we manifest their reality. And why this is so important is when I try to tell people in the new biology, you are creating this life, and most of them go, I wouldn't create this, war, violence, all this kind of stuff. And I go, well, you're creating it, but you let go of creative control because you bought into other people's beliefs about that control. But I said, I bet you what, though, there was a time in your life where you probably fell in love. And when you fell in love, there was a period which I refer to as the honeymoon. A honeymoon is a period that in most people is exemplified by being in exuberant health, having tremendous energy, making love for days without stopping for food or sleep and all that kind of stuff. And that life was so beautiful in that honeymoon that you couldn't wait for the next day to have more experience like that in this honeymoon. And I said, well, was that tantamount to creating heaven on earth? And the answer is yeah. Then I say, that was not an accident, that was not a coincidence. That was actually an understanding when you operated from your conscious wishes and desires and overrode your subconscious programming. For the first time in your life, you actually empowered your life with your wishes and desires and created heaven on earth. That honeymoon generally comes to an end when you get so busy that you let go of that and you will get back into the automatic programming of your life, and that honeymoon seems to dissipate at that point. The fact was what? You created heaven on earth. All of us could do that every day of our lives. And so if we understood how we did it, we could, and understand, of course, why we lost it. There's then the understanding is that you could come back and then do this as a perpetual existence on this planet, to live in a state of the honeymoon, to be healthy, happy, and be so creative that you can't wait for the next day to have more. You've already done it once, and we can do it on and on. What we need is the information that Tom offers, because we have to say with more assurity, because as Tom also brought this up, the civilization that we live in is based on what is called materialistic scientism. And it basically says that we buy our truths in this civilization from science because we recognize them as the truth provider. Is it scientific? Oh, well, that means it's true. Well, we bought our truths from these people. And the fact is, what we have to recognize is that conventional truths, which are based on a Newtonian world of a mechanism and physical reality, are not the reality that Tom is speaking about, that the quantum physicists even knew about in the 1920s when they talked about the whole thing was consciousness in the first place. When the public understands Tom's message, when the public can take Tom's message, integrate it with my message, then what they've already done is recognize, oh my God, I'm an Earth rover, here to create, here to experience, and here to manifest the love, which is, I find from my biological pursuit, and which Tom finds from his physics pursuit, to still be the most fundamental element of both of these sciences. And when they come together and love manifests on this planet, we are already engaged in the next higher level of human evolution.
Yes.
So that's it. That's
the end of the story. Okay, we're finished.
But so both of you have provided the viewer with an understanding that the next evolution is not going to be getting another finger or losing a finger. It's going to be a shift in
organization,
which you would call.
Well, it's information. That's entropy. It's lowering the entropy of the system. That's what information systems do. That's the criteria. If you look at a physical system and how it evolves, then it has to procreate. Otherwise, eventually it disappears, and it has to survive, or it can't procreate. So those are the criteria in our physical system for evolving. In an information system, in a consciousness, the larger conscious system, the way an information system evolves is by lowering its entropy. That means by increasing the amount of information, better information, more useful information. In information theory, you have randomness. All your bits are random, no information. If you can arrange these bits in ways that mean something to you, then that's information. So entropy is a measure of disorder. High entropy, high disorder, more randomness. So here you have this larger consciousness system, this digital information system, and it's evolving, and its criteria for that evolution is lowering entropy, okay? Increasing the quality of that information. Then you get to the point, and you'll have to get this from a much longer talk someplace, and I can't do all that in a short time. You'll realize that the optimum, kind of the optimum low entropy configuration is called love. And that's because consciousness is not about one big monolithic consciousness. Just like biology is not about one big monolithic cell. It's about organizations of cells. That organization is lowering entropy. You can look at biological evolution actually the same way in terms of entropy. It evolves by becoming better information, if you will. Better, more, it's not always more complex, but complexity gives it more order, more structure, lower entropy. So here we are in this larger consciousness system, just a natural system that is evolving toward lower entropy states. We are a collection of individuated units of consciousness interacting with each other because that's lower entropy. That's more complex, that's more order, that's more structure, you see? That's evolution. Now when you have it's become social, it's become an interactive thing, not just a big monolithic consciousness system, but a whole lot of individuated units of consciousness communicating with each other, all netted to each other. We are all netted to each other for the same reason. So when you have this community, the way you optimize the relationships of community is by becoming love. The opposite of that is by fear. Fear is the opposite of love. Fear tears apart, drags it down, does not build. Fear is not a constructive thing. Fear is something that pulls away. So look at, we can look at this reality that we're in. Okay, what would a social arrangement based on fear look like? Well, the individuals would not have any trust because it's based on fear. If somebody got something that was better, a new idea, they'd hold it for themselves so that they could use it to their own best advantage. It's all, what about me? If you had a large collection of such individuals, what would you expect? You would expect they'd all be struggling with each other, trying to get more stuff, get each other stuff, because that's the nature of fear. It's all about me. Fear, protect me. What about mine? Am I going to get enough? What if somebody takes my stuff? Well, now you have to have defense. And if you have to have defense, eventually you have a lot of entities together. You'll have groups of entities forming defense arrangements, right? We call those nations. And these then will fight with each other to keep their stuff or get somebody else's stuff. And eventually in this group you would have probably 5% of all the entities in it owning 95% of all of the value. And everybody else would be struggling to get by, because that's just the way this works. As you form these defense things, they get power in their own, and then there's control of that power. So look around us. What do we have? We obviously have a system that's primarily based on fear, because what we've got is what fear produces. But now look at the other side. Let's say we have a bunch of people and it's all love-based. It's not about self and what about mine and keeping mine. It's about other. Well, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Oh, I invent something that's really useful. Here, let me share it. You have time, or you have labor, or whatever your talents are, whether it's because you're big and strong or whether it's because you are good at weaving. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, we share it. We get along. I'll do this for you. You do that for mine. Now look at this group. What do they create in the long term? Well, they optimize. They optimize through the relationship of something that works for everybody. Nobody's trying to grab something to make sure somebody else doesn't get it before them or keep it away. Defense isn't an issue. There's trust. There's cooperation. So you see, that's how you can get to this idea that the optimal configuration of a group of sentient entities is love, that they interact with each other with love. So that's the low entropy solution. Okay, so if all of these, that decreases the entropy of the system. It also decreases the entropy of the individuals. So the entropy of the individual consciousnesses is decreased, more order, more useful information. The entropy of the system, which is made up of the entropy, of course, of all the individuals, decreases. So remember, we started this with saying that is the criteria for evolution. So the system evolves rather than de-evolves, and it only has two choices. Large complex systems can't really stay in that astable state of evolve a little, de-evolve a little. You can do that for a while, but eventually it comes to two choices. You either evolve or you die. In information systems, die means you end up with, no information. It dissolves. It pulls itself apart. It loses its order and structure and meaning and significance. Okay, so then that gets us to the answer to why are we doing all this? Why are we here? Why would you need two things, the spirit and the physical, if you will? Well, this physical, of course, isn't physical. It's a virtual reality. Why? Because what we're here to do is experience. Just what Bruce said. This is our point. We're here in a virtual reality to experience. And what's the point of experiencing? So we can grow up. So we can lower the entropy of our consciousness. We're part of this larger system strategy to evolve, to not die. Okay? And so we're here in this experiential space. All experiential realities are virtual realities. Our dream reality is another virtual reality. What happens where you wake up after you die here is another virtual reality. If it's experiential reality, it's a virtual reality. And there are hundreds and hundreds of virtual realities, some of them physical, appearing like this one because their rule set is tight. The rule set is the structure of how energy exchanges in that set, and that kind of defines how it works. So in this, our rule set is basically what science digs up, all the facts, the gravity and the biology, the chemistry. These all become parts of the facts of the rule set of this virtual reality. Every virtual reality has to have a rule set. Otherwise, the beings in a virtual reality, wouldn't know what to do or how to do it. There wouldn't be any structure to it, so it wouldn't be of any value. So you have these virtual realities where individuated units of consciousness go to have experience with a free will. Now, free will is really a simple thing. It's not such a big thing. Free will is just the free will to choose from among your available choices, available to you. Now, that doesn't mean all the theoretical choices you might have, because you might have 100 choices given a stimulus, but you may only be aware of 10 of those. Well, you have free will to choose one of those 10. That's all the free will you need in order to grow. Now, if you make a choice that is more toward being love, more toward cooperation, toward sharing, toward helping, toward it's about you, not just about me, you make a love-based choice rather than a fear-based choice, then you and the whole system evolves. If you make a choice that's, what do you have that I want, and how am I going to get it, and if I get it, how am I going to keep it, if that's the way you interact, then that's a fear-based choice, and you de-evolve, and the whole system de-evolves. So here we are, we're individuated pieces of this larger consciousness system. We're here in order to experience so that we can make choices, which basically means, the choices are really the things that we make in this virtual reality are really kind of secondary. The first thing is our intent. Our intent is what describes us, the quality of our being. I talk about the quality of consciousness. So that is who and what we are at the inside, at the gut level. You may say at the spiritual level or at the core level. And we have this intent, and this intent then is expressed in choice. My intent is that I'd like to be helpful to you. I'd like to do things that, make your life better or easier or whatever. And my intent is, this, or my intent is to see how much of what you have that I need that I can get. So these are our intents. Because of the intent, we take a choice of the choices that we see that are available to us. So free will can obviously be programmed in a computer, if you will, because all you need has some fuzzy logic, so it's not all just logical process. It has to be some choice in it. And in this world, what happens? We never have enough information to make a logical choice. You can't deduce anything except the most trivial of things. Where did I leave my glasses? Well, you can deduce a little of that. You can say, well, where was I last? Well, they're not there. Where was I before that? And so on. You can use a little logic, but that's a very trivial problem. And all the big things that actually matter. Who am I going to marry? Where am I going to live? How many children would I like to have? You don't have enough information to make a logical decision. Very little of our life and very little of our intent and our choices are based on logic. Now, we believe that we're logical. We believe that we're rational beings, but in fact, we're not. And we couldn't be. We don't have enough information. So we're in this situation of choice making. And this is not incompatible with a digital simulation at all. You just have, if you have a digital simulation where there's not enough information to make, a specific choice is the only one that's good, then you make these kind of fuzzy choices. Well, based on my experience, what's experience? That's all your input that you've gotten. Based on all my input, and based on the things I've done before and the way those have worked out, I think I'll go this way. You see, that's free will, and not incompatible at all with a digital information system. So here we are, part of this larger system. We are in this virtual reality. Why? Because this gives us traction. In order to learn, you need choices. In order to have choices, you need a rule set to define the rules of the game. In order to have that, you need a virtual reality. Otherwise, you're just a consciousness interacting with a consciousness. Imagine 100,000 people all online in a chat room where there are no rules. What can you learn? What do you get out of that? What information can you take away from that that's useful to you? Well, none, really. That big lumberjack you were talking with about, life in the woods in Oregon, maybe a 13-year-old girl, sitting in her, her father's apartment somewhere in a townhouse in, New York City. You have no idea about this information or the quality of it or where it comes from. And it's hard to get traction in that kind of a situation where there's the only rule is that you can receive and transmit. Here in this virtual reality, we have traction. We have feedback. We have you are a miserable person that's all about fear. You create a miserable environment that's all about fear. That's feedback. You're supposed to learn. So what are we here for? We're here to grow up. We're here to increase the quality of our consciousness. Why? Because we're part of a larger consciousness system and it's live or die. That's just kind of the way it is. So that puts a context then to your kind of question, why is it like this? And what are we doing here? Why do you have these various parts? But as Bruce was saying, it all boils down to information. See, that's what virtual realities are. They're just an information system. When you talk about the World of Warcraft, you know, all the information is in the server. These are just, it's just on your screen is where the virtual reality is working. Well, our screen's a 3D screen in this virtual reality. You know, let's talk a little about biology then. You know, what about our brain? You know, and people see, well, our brain is somehow the transducer between this other field, and I would not say it's energy. It's information. You know, energy is a metaphor for something that can affect something else. You know, we call that energy. Well, we're just information. We're getting information because that's what defines us, and that's what defines reality. So what about the brain? Does the brain contain a lot of information? No, the brain is a virtual brain. This is a virtual body. The brain doesn't compute anything. It doesn't process anything. It doesn't store anything. Well, then what's going on here? The only reason you think it does is because you believe this virtual reality is a real physical reality. That's why you think that brain is storing information. The reason we have these physical forms that we have, and all the fauna and all the critters that we have here, is because they have evolved here. They've evolved here in a big simulation that had a rule set that started with just a little ball of energy all in a tight wad at one place. Those were the initial conditions of this simulation. The rule set and the start with the ball of energy. Somebody hits the run button and the computer starts to compute, and the little ball expands because it's very hot, and we have a big digital bang, you see. And pretty soon we've evolved this universe, and then part of this universe happens to be this little place called Earth that happens to have a sun that just happens to be about right for a couple of amino acids to get together and have a dance and turn into a cell that evolves, and here we are sitting here today, you know, the result of all of that evolution. Now, so what's this physical brain, you know, is just part of that simulation. It's just information. What it does is it defines the constraints. So we are consciousness. We are not physical bodies. We are not, you know, we are, you know, we live forever, right? We're, what's the word for that? We're immortal because we're not this physical stuff. But we're constrained by the rule set. The rule set as defined by this simulation. So we can only jump so high. We can't jump 20 feet in the air. Why? Because in this simulation that evolved the way it did, critters called us can't jump 20 feet in the air. That's not the way they're built. They don't have the muscles, the structure and so on to do that. We can't learn calculus and differential equations in an hour because the rule set says we have limitations on how we can, process, how we can function. That's because of the biology. That's the evolution, the biology system. It's all part of this simulation, if you will. So what the brain does, it's our representation of the constraints that's placed on our experience as subsets of this digital information system. So you see, all the physical stuff are just constraints. Well, constraints work here just like they work in World of Warcraft. The guy in a World of Warcraft can't walk through a tree, can't walk through a rock. If it falls off a cliff, it gets hurt. If it stays too long underwater, it drowns. Those are all constraints that the computer puts on the game. That's called that game's rule set. Well, we have a rule set. So this is solid. Why? Because that's in the rule set. Just like, the World of Warcraft guys find rocks and trees solid for the same reason. That's our physics. No two things can occupy the same place at the same time. Oh, well, I got one of the rules there. So we can't do that. So that's the idea. So that kind of ties it into biology. These biological systems we have basically represent the constraints that have evolved in this digital simulation, and we as experiencers have to experience within the bounds of those constraints. So we can only remember so much, we can only process so much, we can only do so many things at the same time, because that's the constraint the evolution in this simulation puts upon us. So that kind of ties then the biology, and the information system together. The biology is just a virtual biology, but it sets the constraints on what we do. So that's kind of the tie-in between the things that you were saying and kind of where I was. And that it's hard for people to get their arms around this idea we live in a virtual reality. We have this cultural belief that this is physical, hard stuff. It's fundamental. This universe is it. There isn't anything outside this universe. Oh, there isn't? Well, what's this universe expanding into? Doesn't make sense if there's just this universe, and this universe is the root of all things that exist. What's it expanding? Well, it's not expanding anything. It's just a number in the simulation. It can expand, you can take your computer and have a sphere, and you can make that sphere get as big as you want. It's not limited by the size of the universe. It can just expand. Big Bang, where did that Big Bang come from? Where did that little ball of energy come from? Why was that sitting there and then suddenly let loose to expand? Where did that come from? Well, it couldn't come from this universe because our universe didn't exist yet. It didn't exist until that thing was there and expanded. So it had to come from elsewhere. Well, if we define physical as this universe, that's physical. It's our perception in this universe, then what we're expanding into and where that ball of energy came from then has to be non-physical because it's not part of this universe, right? So right away it's obvious that we're in a subset and that there is a superset out there that we call non-physical. That's, this logic doesn't leave you any other explanation. And then once you understand that superset is just digital information, and science is coming to that conclusion all the time. That's the same conclusion you came to with, it's just about information. These things are trading information. Information's at the core of everything. In quantum mechanics, they'll tell you that the very root core of the world is just information based on probability. So this larger system we're talking about is a probabilistic statistical system. It's not a deterministic system. You don't have to have a piece of data for every thing here, for every particle, for every state of every particle. Does not have to have a piece of data. That would be wasteful. We have to think of the system as being clever enough to have evolved to be efficient. It's a probabilistic reality. Why should particles be probability? The probabilistic, that's the root. It's a probabilistic reality. It's non-physical, and they come into our awareness in a data stream, just like it does in World of Warcraft. Your character's getting a data stream that comes to your computer that puts out the image. Well, here's our computer screen. This is 3D reality. It puts out this image. We interact. It's a multiplayer game. So see how all that just kind of works out real well. You see, we end up with the exact same conclusions, and basically our difference is that we have different metaphors. Getting the brakes on here.